Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the 7Hz Sonus, and this is the outer packaging. This is everything on the inside, and this is what it looks like up close. So I have the red version, which has a great faceplate, and I love the red. The downside of it is you can't quite see everything, all the guts on the inside. You can kind of see a BA there. There is a dynamic driver somewhere in there, which we can't really get a good view of, but yes, it is a 1+1 and has a cool nozzle filter right there. It's shaped like a flower. So a lot of cool little touches on this one. I think it is a really nice faceplate. It's a nice build, a nice look. Would I wish I had the clear one? Probably, because I think that one looks a little better. But the red one is very nice. And I do thank Linsoul for sending over any version of it. Very much thankful for that. Other unique thing that you get in the box is the flat ribbon cable. So it does have this half clear 3.5 millimeter connector, which is super cool, but the flat ribbon cable is actually super cool. And another thing to notice about this guy is not only is it a cool looking cable that doesn't tangle, you also get right angle 2 pins. So those should actually work on most sets as well, not just Sonus. So super useful cable, very unique, worked out really well. The number of stock cables that I use for reviews is pretty slim, but this is one that I use because it is so unique and had the need to check it out. You also get 2 pairs of tips. It's kind of a 07 style, and I think that's the 08 style-ish. I'm not sure if this is their version of it or what, but 2 familiar looking style of tips, and then you get a mini repair kit on the filters and the nozzle, those nozzle protectors. So a couple there. So pretty cool for those of you who live in more condensation heavy areas. You do have a way to do a mini replacement on these guys. So very nice idea, a little bit thoughtful. You also do get a 7Hz case as well. So that is everything that is in the box. So we will push all this to the side and then we will get to it. And I'll start right there. I think this one is the most predictable graph and executed better than I thought it was going to be. So we'll take a look at this one right here. So this is the graph. And I think right away, I think if you are a graph person, this tells you almost everything you need to know about this set. The signature, is a lot of yeses, and then there's a couple unknowns. But I think the sub-bass level, I think that is a big yes. I think that is a very popular music-friendly level. I think there's enough sub-bass there for pretty much anyone. It's not bass head level, but very much enough sub-bass there for most genres. I think the mid-bass level was the one that was going to be questionable because it's so close to the Harman level. And if you're looking at a typical set that was released, this year or last year that was Harman, it was kind of up here somewhere. So a couple dB lower than some other sets, but for those of you who are into graphs, you also know that this gives you super clean mids. The only question was how lean it was going to be, but I think most of you look at it like that is going to be very beautiful mids, and that's essentially what happens there. Also, low pin army people, this is 6 dB. It is a double yes. I think that it was the perfect idea right there for pin gain. Rise a little early, but rise lower at 6 dB. Carried straight over, a little dip where it gets a little spicy on some genres, and then carry out through extension. And again, the extension bit, that was going to be a little bit unknown. You never know what someone's coupler is going to do and whether that actually extends out there. So, but happy to say that all extends as well as it should. This little mid bass, even though it's a little lower, gets to take advantage of the reduced pin gain. So this sounds a little more present than what you're thinking. And, this is the same thing that we talked about with Zero Red. If you bring this down a little bit, you don't need as much here, and it puts everything in balance, and that's exactly what happens with Sonus. So, yes, lots of predictable things on the graph, but very, very well executed in a 1+1 format, design, configuration, and I do think it actually came out a little better than I thought it was going to come out. And a lot of that was the price range, right? I think there was a little debate as to what the final price was going to be, and as soon as I saw it was $59, I thought, did they price it low because it's maybe not as good as they thought it was, or are they just trying to hit a price point? And I'm pretty sure they debated that it actually sounds a little more expensive than the $59, and maybe they had wanted to raise the price a bit, but I do think they nailed it. But I did kind of pause when I saw the price and thought, what's going to be wrong with it? And I'm kind of happy to say there's nothing really wrong with it. So how do you choose between the 3 recent hybrids, the EM6L Phoenix, Tangzhou's Voodoo, and Sonus? So we'll take a quick look. You can kind of see on the graph what really happens on all 3. So Sonus is sort of the lightest bass version of all 3 signatures, but it does have a reduced pinna gain. So this isn't no mid bass. This is just kind of a lower level of it. Simco EM6L actually has a really nice bass curve, kind of the same as Voodoo, but EM6L and Simco tend to leave this upper mid through treble a little higher. That's their house sound. They like a lot of energy right there, and that's exactly what that set is targeted to, people who like that energy right there. Voodoo is sort of the opposite of that. You've got a lot of bass. It's this warm, bassy set, but a reduced track through the treble. So it's for people who don't like all that energy, who like their sound to be more centered down here, and that's exactly where Voodoo is. So Sonus is sort of this cleaner, still have some sub bass, very clean mids for people who are more mid-focused. People who like low pinna gain, who really like those female vocals, but in low pinna gain format, very smooth, still energetic, but not peaky energetic, not overly energetic. And then just a really nice tore through treble. So what did I say about Sonus? So for those of you who complained about Harman sets with too much bloated bass, right? So they brought down the level a little bit, tightened it up. So not as bloated as some recent Harman sets. And for those of you who thought 0 was a bit too fatiguing and bright, that lower pinna gain is actually going to hit you in the right spot. So I think they kind of course corrected on those 2 things, and very wise design choices. Also, Sonus is actually I think it's the best one that works at lower volume. I think EM6L, it's kind of a lower volume set too, but again, it's just a lot of treble there. Voodoo needs more volume because of the relaxed version of treble. It needs a little more volume to fall in place. Sonus is probably the one that really hits all listener types in the same way, and I think they did a really good job with that. It's not restricted to lower volume at all. It actually, you can turn it up quite a bit. So mid bass, I think that, like I just talked about on the graph, I think it does require a little thought, and I think people are going to call it V-shaped, U-shaped. It's a somewhat hard to pin down. And I think when tracks go deep into sub bass or sub bass heavy, it does sound a little more V-shaped. There's actually quite a bit of sub bass there. I mean, that's not really a shy level. When you get above 5 dB, it tends to get into V-shape style sub bass. It's kind of up there. It extends pretty far. It's actually quite present. So yeah, I do think you can mistake it and call it V-shaped, but otherwise, when you're not doing a whole lot of sub bass, it definitely sounds U-shaped or even mid-centric with female vocal-led tracks. The mid-bass presence will range from, one of the mid-bass presence will range, and it is definitely one of the less predictable parts, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but how that mid-bass level works on your tracks and your genres is actually a little bit harder to predict. So my favorite tracks on this guy, Madonna's The Immaculate Collection, the whole thing, very, very good. I think female vocals and mids, I think all that stuff works super well on Sonus. So this is another one of these things that I wasn't really sure how it was going to fall out from the graph. The detail and the resolution with a 1+1 configuration. And what I'll say is what really was going to happen was you were going to get nice sub bass, but it wasn't really going to flow into the mids at all. You were going to end up with super clean, open mids from this mid bass level, which is exactly what happened. And when you do that, you've got to have detail and resolution that backs it up, because you've essentially exposed the whole thing. There's no mid bass to cover it up. The sub bass isn't really going to cover it up. There's not enough treble to cover it up. You've kind of fully exposed the mids, and you better have that detail and resolution and technicalities to back it up. And I think they did that with this and did it in a 1+1. And I think it's kind of unique the way they actually did it. Actually, there aren't that many 1+1 sets that are good. There's a ton of bad 1+1s, and this one actually sounds like someone thought matching tuning to driver capabilities was a good idea. That's exactly what it sounds like. They took exactly what the drivers can do, tuned it to the drivers, and the whole thing works, together as it should. So yeah, I actually do think 7Hz put quite a bit of thought into which drivers they chose, what the range was going to be on those drivers, and really come out with an optimal tuning that really hit both of the drivers in the right way. And I think they did that quite well. So impedance, yes, it is real, and you're probably wondering why my graph looked a little flatter than everyone else's, and here's sort of your answer. So I tend to measure on low impedance ES100. That's about 0.1, and it gives you a flatter graph, and you can kind of see that there. If you give it a little more impedance, if you give it an 18 ohm impedance adapter, you actually get the bumps and the little peaks that other people have on their graph. So no real mystery there. It's just kind of however you measure it on your source device will give you a slightly different version of impedance. But I will say that I do prefer it on low. I think the 0.1 version actually is better than the one with the little peaks, but just my personal preference. Sound, like I talked about, it can actually range from a V to a U, but the lack of bleed through the mid bass into the mids, I think, calls for it to be a U. But if you're going to call it a V, I kind of get that depending on what your music is like. So the bass, so boosted sub bass to lighter mid bass, and I think that is the best way to characterize it. You get this range of sub bass is actually quite heavy, and it's definitely boosted. And then as you transition into the mid bass, it drops off pretty quickly. And by the time you're at 200 and 300, there's not a whole lot of extra energy there. So heavy mid bass, push all the energy out here. Super clean mids, not a whole lot of bleed going on there, but also not a whole lot of mid bass energy for you guys who like deep male vocals, guitars, rock. There are some genres that need more energy here, and you'll notice that male vocals as well. So I do think this one kind of lands up here in the female vocal range. I think that works out a little better, but yeah, the mid bass, lots of sub bass, but trying to figure out how that hits your tracks is a little more complicated. So sub bass driven, I think those tracks end up a little bit better, but Sonus is very picky on bass levels, as I just talked about. From track to track, you'll notice it's actually quite different. On the other hand, this is one of the recent hybrids that can do Go-Go Penguin and other genres that need tighter, quality-driven, non-dominant bass style. The other two that I mentioned, EM6L and Voodoo, tend to be a little too heavy on the bass for a trio like that, where you need balance across all three players. I think Sonus, that is the sweet spot. Balance and very controlled but present bass. I think they actually nailed that quite well. The dynamic driver is there, but very much a quality-driven, non-dominant bass style. Or you can go into Metallica and say you just want impactful drums. If it hits the sub bass, those end up being very impactful, and because they're out in the sub bass, but it doesn't affect your mids. So again, this U shape is kicking in. And then you hit a track like Skrillex way back, kind of an EDM track, and the bass is good until you hear her voice, and then you kind of realize where the set is really, really good. And bass, I think it actually is really good, but as soon as you hear a female vocal, you kind of figure out where the sweet spot is on this one. And the same for Madonna, like I talked about with Immaculate Collection. Everything sounds really good. There's lots of low energy. It's a pop song, so it's kind of a dancey. There's some bass there. On the treble side, you get a lot of electronics. It's actually very clear, and the imaging and all that stuff is actually really great. Very much an entertaining, engaging set. But, nothing is as good as her vocals. I think as soon as you hear them, you just kind of zone in on where the sweet spot is on this set. So will a warmer source help? Yeah, I think it actually gives you a little more dimension. The balanced armature still sounds like a little bit like a balanced armature. If you give it a little more warmth, kind of take that edge off of it, I think it does sound a little more natural. And it sounds quite natural on its own, but can you lean it, into a better preference for you? Yeah, I think you can actually do that. Just watch impedance like I talked about, because that will make it a little bit sharper. So mids, pretty much everything that you thought it was going to be, clean and resolving and transparent and clear and sharp but not truncated. The dynamic or the balanced armature is not super fast. Super fast in a bad way. It actually has decay, and there's a lot of subtleness to what Sonos can do that lots of other $59 sets can't do because of the tuning. And I'll sort of go back to there's not a whole lot of masking going on, right? So sub bass doesn't really cover up too much. They brought the mid bass down, so super clear. You can hear everything in the mids. This is 6 dB, again, not going to mask things that are happening in the treble. Very, very nice, subtle things happening in the treble, reverb and decays, things that are hard to pick up on other sets. The tuning actually zones in, and you can hear them pretty good on Sonus. It's kind of surprising when you really listen to it, what it's actually doing, and think about the price point. But some really, really nice tuning to get some of those things, to tease out some of those things that are much harder to hear on sets at the same price point. But as I said, pretty close to your assumption of what it was going to graph in a 1BA, but better executed, like I just said. Tuning-wise, they really nailed a lot of subtleness to how well this does. How the treble complements the mids into a beautiful experience, like I was just talking about. Harder to assume, but done very well. Some real refinement from the mids to the treble to the upper treble, so it sounds more than a price tag like I was just talking about. It does things that you find in pricier sets, and very subtle. You need a very clean source and a good pair of ears, but a lot of it is there. So it still leans a little bit Harman, so a little bit more clean than Lush, right? So I think some of the other two, like EM6L and both Voodoo, I think those would tend to be a little more lush, as just a little bit more warmth and meat in the mid bass. But a warmer source will take some of that edge off, and female vocals and instrument separation and imaging are really the stars here, and just really well executed at those things. Treble, and again, this is where it all comes together. That lower treble level, that lower pinna level, there's no upper treble bump. There's no crazy 13, 15K thing out there that is distracting. No mid bass masking. Really nice extension on the balanced armature. This is what it all should sound like when the tuning is right. You should hear everything all the way out to here. And you can say that there isn't a ton of extension and air out there, but it all gets set up perfectly to hear it because there's not a whole lot here. 6 dB isn't going to mask what happens out here, and they do have enough extension. It's very natural, and it's not over boosted like you may be used to. But again, listen to all the subtle things that Sonus can do, and it's all there. You just have to listen to it. So yeah, I really dig how they did it, and I think the tuning wise with that capable BA really takes the treble all the way into air. I don't need to turn it up for the treble to fall in place. One of the better volume sets in recent memory for giving all listener types a similar experience. So like I said, it actually works quite well at low volume. It's definitely one of my better. I don't like that many low volume sets. This one actually hits in the right spot because as you turn it down, it doesn't really change a whole lot. The mids don't drop back. The treble doesn't fall away. Done very well. I'm not even sure how they did it. It's one of those unique things about that Sonus that I haven't run across all that often, but definitely the BA seem a little more than the price. And will you notice BA timbre? I do think if Miley Cyrus's voice sounds a little bit more nasally, definitely check out what the impedance is on your source and check out a warmer source. I think that will kind of get you there as well. Stage, again, as you would expect, you've got clean bass, clean mids, extended treble. You're going to end up with great stage and great imaging, great separation. Better than the $59 experience for me on a clean source. So this is tuned really well here, and what would probably have ruined it is what they flattened out, right? So if this was not 6 dB, this thing is key to a lot of bits here. It's key to this, and it's key to this, and putting it at 6 dB just makes everything work, and that would have been the bit that would have ruined the stage. If that was a little bit too high, it probably would have flattened the stage in your face, and it probably would have made it too hard to hear the air. So again, just a brilliant low pinna, early rise, low pinna, not unique to Sonus, but executed very, very well, like pretty much everything else about Sonus. So that's what I got. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.